Now in the last Blackhorn guide I made a joke that says something like, this isn't like the last gunship battle. You had to travel to Northrend back then, and all the haters put down their glasses long enough to spurt off, hey Kina, the last gunship battle was in Northrend, dumbass. Let me take a moment to point out one easily overlooked fact. Bam! Above the frozen sea. See, that could be anywhere. Yeah, Dragon Soul is in Northrend, but this fight ain't. Boom, 3 points, Jeremy Lin style. On to the guide. Just like on normal, Warmaster Blackhorn is a 2-phase fight on Heroic. Phase 1 is still about ad control, while Phase 2 is a burn phase. There are a few new spells and important differences, but the ads will remain the same. Blackhorn himself has around 85 million HP on Heroic, and his Drake Goriona, who you will also need to kill on Heroic, has around 80 million. You'll want to bring 2 tanks, 6 to 7 healers, and a good balance of strong DPS. As with all of our heroic guides, this guide will assume that you have done the fight on the normal difficulty, and as such are familiar with normal mode spells and tactics. For more in-depth coverage of the fight as a whole, please refer to our normal mode strategy guide. There are a few new spells and important changes in Phase 1 on heroic mode. We'll start with the most obvious. During the first phase of the fight, as the ship takes damage, fires will begin to break out on the deck. Like most fire in the game, these will deal damage to any player standing in them and will slowly spread across the ship. The more damage the ship takes, the more fire that will spawn. Some firefighter gnomes will appear to help extinguish the flames, but don't expect these guys to be much help. Apparently they were trained by Mimeron or something. In order to help ensure deck fires do actually start, Goriona has a new move on Heroic. She will periodically bombard the side of the ship with her broadside spell, dealing 20% damage to the ship. The final Phase 1 change can be seen in the Twilight Barrage. Players will still soak this like normal, but players hit by it will receive a debuff causing them to take substantially increased shadow damage for a short duration. After 3 waves of ads, the fight will transition into Phase 2. This phase remains the same as normal, with one extremely important difference. Instead of flying away to leave Blackhorn on his own, once Goriona has taken enough damage, she will now land on the ship to join in the fight directly. Your raid will need to defeat Goriona, then Blackhorn, and do it all before the enrage timer. Because the biggest difference in the fight will be seen in Phase 2, Phase 1 will remain more or less the same. Position ads near the front of the ship to be tanked and spread ranged DPS and healers across the ship in small pairs. These pairs will be responsible for soaking Twilight Barrages in their area. Because of the significantly increased damage of heroic mode, it is more important than ever for all players to make it to the Twilight Onslaught. Your raid will want to rotate cooldowns to help lower the damage if possible. Any AoE raid CD will work, but make sure to have one for each onslaught. Beyond this, the phase will remain about efficiently DPSing ads down to keep them under control and soaking the proper damage from the ship. This is of course made more difficult by the fires that begin to litter the ship as the phase goes on. One important note is to not allow the fire to impede when you need to move. Running through the fire quickly will not do too much damage, so if getting from point A to point B requires you to get a little burn, then remember your Firelands training. After 3 waves have passed, Phase 2 will begin, and this is where the biggest difference in the fight becomes apparent. Begin just like normal. Have one tank pick up Blackhorn, but do not begin to DPS him too much. The lower Blackhorn's health gets, the more damage he does. This is exceptionally unhelpful since your raid will need to defeat his mount, Goriona, before Blackhorn himself. Instead, have ranged DPS go all out on Goriona in order to cause her to land on the ship. As soon as she does, have the off-tank pick up Goriona and face her away from the raid. She has a frontal breath, so only the tank should be in front of her. Position the raid primarily around Blackhorn. Range cannot stand too close to avoid being silenced by his disrupting roar, but also not too far, to make dodging Shockwave easier. This can admittedly be difficult to see with the huge dragon sitting on the ship, but with timers and experience, the graphic can be watched for and anticipated quite easily. The instant Goriona has been picked up, all DPS should focus on her. The raid has to kill her as fast as possible to ease positioning and allow more time to work down Blackhorn. Do not try to cleave or AoE both down at the same time, as this will increase Blackhorn's damage and make life very hard for the healers. Just focus on killing Goriona as fast as possible. Once she has been killed, the positioning will change once more. Bring Blackhorn to the middle of the ship and position the raid in one stack group behind the boss. The goal of this is to make his shockwave area very predictable. Ideally, it will always target the raid group, allowing all players to simply run left or right together and avoid it. The other advantage is this allows players to remain stacked for raid cooldowns. This will become necessary again at the end of the fight when Blackhorn's damage begins to skyrocket. Remember, the lower his health goes, the higher his damage goes. This means his disrupting roar, which cannot be avoided, can potentially one-shot players near the end of the fight. It is essential that from 50% health and down, the raid uses a cooldown for every disrupting roar. When done properly, this will have a very set pattern to it. The raid stacks up, Blackhorn uses Shockwave, and the whole raid runs right or left together to avoid it. Shortly after this, he will cast Disrupting Roar, and the raid will use any raid cooldown to lower the damage and proceed to heal it up. Dodge the next Shockwave in the same way as before, and continue until the boss is dead. Usually I'd say understanding the fight is the key to defeating it, but since it varies only slightly from normal mode, we can assume that the understanding part is already there. Instead, I'll point out that this is my favorite kind of fight. I consider it rhythmic. Everything happens at a set time with a set pattern, a lot like Ragnaros or Bethtelak. Once you've seen the fight enough times and become familiar with the rhythm or pattern, the whole fight should seem to fall into place. Focus on consistency and try to isolate mistakes in order to make progress more quickly. If you found this guide helpful or informative, remember to bookmark us at LearntoRaid.com, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on theThemeLive.com. As always, we hope this guide was helpful, and we'll see you at the next boss.
I wasn't feeling so good. I just didn't feel like playing anymore. So I went home, and I got all comfy and cozy and all scrunched up in front of my phonograph.